Love this cartoon. The little kid's asking, why do we have wars? Mommy says, because we're ruled by an elite group of psychopaths who own the banks that control the governments and media. They fund both sides of war for profit. They manufacture the consent of the public through the propaganda of the media. I think we're all very aware of this propaganda and the manufacturing of consent and this Hegelian dialectic that to get the situation they want, they fund the opposite sides of the same problem. I first went to Burning Man in 1998. I've been there 11 times, and I've also been to one of their regional burns. And I've seen Burning Man change a great deal in that time. And I've also seen San Francisco and the tech industry itself change a great deal in that time. And recently, Elon Musk was quoted as saying that Burning Man is Silicon Valley. And if you want to understand Silicon Valley, you really need to go to Burning Man. Burning Man is so similar to the 60s. The 60s counterculture in San Francisco, these hippies, they believed in peace and love, and that was going to bring about, an end to wars and violence and make the world a better place. And when we look behind it, we find the same people, the same organizations, the same frameworks. What I'm trying to do is to place Burning Man in a broader historical context.
Put what happened with the human being in the perspective of the history of LSD. We have Bicycle Day, which supposedly is the first time anybody deliberately chose to take a trip on LSD. Hoffman knew what he was going into when he took it and rode the bicycle. I don't know, but 1943. Then we have Wasson on the cover of Life magazine announcing magic mushrooms to the world in 1957, and that seems to be tied with the Beat generation, and also the Jack Kerouac on the road, but James Dean, Rebel Without a Cause. This was an early prototype of the social engineering and drugs being targeted towards the youth. And then we shoot forward to when Leary and Alpert were fired from Harvard and used that as the thing that catapulted him into stardom. And he was quite open about saying that was a marketing strategy for them. Yeah, the acid came basically out of nowhere, out of people that were in elite Defense Department and intelligence agency research projects. They were getting the LSD. And then suddenly it started to trickle out through Bear Owsley and the Grateful Dead. Bill Graham, the promoter, we're going to talk about him. His first show at the Fillmore, which was with Jefferson Airplane, Great Society, Mystery Trend, and the Warlocks. They weren't even known really as the Dead then. Was the 10th of December, 1965. Although technically the first Grateful Dead show is the 4th of December, 1965, and the Warlocks was May 1965. So the Grateful Dead, by the time of the human being, Grateful Dead's really only been performing for about a year and a half around the Bay Area, and pretty much really just at these acid tests. This official post of the Gathering of the Tribes, you can see it's called Pow Wow, a gathering of the tribes for a human being. And you've got this crusty, almost Neanderthal-looking guy sitting on it's probably not even a horse, more of a donkey. He's got his guitar. He's holding a blanket. I don't know if there's smallpox on that blanket. And above him is a Talon holding 2 white lightning bolts. And Bear Owsley is their manufacturing LSD called White Lightning. So if you know that, then you can clearly see that those 2 lightning bolts are a code that the LSD is going to be at this event. The tune in, turn on, drop out that Larry so famously said here, he actually released it as an album, as a limited edition record, his very first record that was circulated for a few months before the human being. Anyway, they said to begin the new year and the new age, 20 to 50,000 members of the new nation inside the old are gathering for a peace dance and powwow. Leaders, gurus, poets, and musicians of the new race will celebrate with us. And then they listed Allen Ginsberg, Timothy Leary, Richard Alpert, Dick Gregory, Gary Snyder, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Jerry Rubin, Mario Savio, and all San Francisco rock bands. So this is a map of the San Francisco Peninsula. A quarter of the peninsula used to be military land in the Presidio base, and the Presidio is visible in the middle of the screen there. That's where Burning Man started, Baker Beach next to the Presidio. The Church of Satan also started next to the Presidio, in 1966, and it had many, many military, especially military intelligence members. And just to the south of the Panhandle is the Haight-Ashbury district, or Hashbury, which is between the University of San Francisco and the University of California, San Francisco. They put this thing there. The tribes really being Berkeley and Stanford. And over in Berkeley is the New Left, which is becoming increasingly radicalized. You mentioned Saul Alinsky. You've got the Black Panthers coming out of there as well. And then over on the Stanford side, you've got the Stewart Brand group and the New Communalists. And, you know, don't take drugs, man. Get computers. They're better than drugs. Or if you're going to take drugs, do it to expand your mind and improve your engineering capabilities. This other guy, Stewart Brand, pretty much everything that's happened in technology since the 60s and the counterculture, he's been there somehow behind it. I mean, that's one hell of a coincidence. He's a merry prankster, you know, participant and even organizer of the acid tests. He came out of Phillips Exeter Academy, which is one of the most elite prep schools in the country. Mark Zuckerberg, from the Facebook founder, also came out of the same academy. And then he went to Stanford. He studied anthropology, got a degree majoring in biology. Then he left and went to Ranger School, and he was in ROTC. He entered the Army as a lieutenant, was involved in training troops in Fort Dix, New Jersey, but also somehow became the Army's most senior photographer. He's a parachutist, and he trained in leadership and small unit management. So he's come out of the Pentagon and then directly into SRI, the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab, and then going on to found the Whole Earth Catalog, the TRIPS Festival, the Well, which was the precursor to the World Wide Web. He's the founder of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. He founded the Global Business Network, Wired Magazine, and Mondo 2000. He was very involved in the creation of them, the Long Now Foundation. He's the guy who coined the term personal computer. Stewart Brand's been linked to Gregory Bateson. He's part of the Sausalito houseboats community with Alan Watts, an advisor to Jerry Brown. He knew Timothy Leary when he was at Millbrook, and he knew Ram Dass from Perry Lane. And then when he created the Well, that's Larry Brilliant, the Grateful Dead's doctor, who then went on to head Google.org, Google's philanthropy division. So Stewart Brand, he's someone who's pretty informed, I think, to speak about technology, the counterculture, the acid tests. Here's what he says about Burning Man. Burning Man, they've surpassed in every way the various things we were attempting with the acid tests and the TRIPS Festival. And all the things we were farting around with, Larry Harvey has really pulled off. So there's the founder of the acid test telling you that Burning Man is the ultimate realization of everything they tried to do in the acid test.
They spun out Esalen from Stanford, probably on the instructions of Aldous Huxley, certainly with an enormous amount of input and contribution from him. I mean, he ended up living there and then dying there. And after they set up Esalen, all of the 60s came about. And then the entire UC, University of California system was set up by Daniel Coit Gilman, who was one of the founders of Skull and Bones and the Russell Trust. You've got Menlo Park and Palo Alto, the VA hospital down there, quite a big VA hospital. That was ground zero of MK Ultra experiments. Vacaville Mental Prison, that's on the road to Burning Man from San Francisco. Jonestown wasn't that far away. So, you know, this is happening in the center of so much of these cult activities, and the characteristics of a cult will draw into that a little bit more, but just quickly: peer pressure, public shaming, creation myth, charismatic leadership, rejection, distrust of outsiders, recognizable uniform and vocabulary, and those who leave get shunned. You shared an example there from Carol Quigley's Anglo-American establishment. I guess I'll read it out, but he's basically describing how secret societies can influence government policy. Says, by the interaction of these various branches on one another under the pretense that each branch was an autonomous power, the influence of each branch was increased through a process of mutual reinforcement. The unanimity among the various branches was believed by the outside world to be the result of the influence of a single truth, while really it was the result of the existence of a single group. Before the MK Ultra project began, we had very similar sort of, seems like, research objectives going on in the Tavistock Institute in London, and basically along the ideas of Freud. And then they established this global network where they plugged into, I'm just going to read some names out: University of Sussex, Stanford Research Institute, Esalen, MIT, MITRE and RAND Corporation, Hudson Institute, Heritage Foundation,
the Center of Strategic and International Studies at Georgetown, US Air Force Intelligence, the Mont Pelerin Society, the Trilateral Commission, the Ditchley Foundation, the Club of Rome, all of these organizations, and the Bilderberg Group. Yeah, they're going to each other's conferences, they're sitting on each other's boards of directors. And Brigadier General Sir John Rawlings Rees, basically during World War II, he put together this invisible college of think tank that were helping him, and this is a lot of the guys from the Special Operations Executive and the OSS, elite individuals and families came together around World War II, and basically the military and intelligence agencies and banking system were merged. But what the military was looking at was this new technology of psychological warfare. First of all, it's the Duke of Bedford, who's a member of the Russell family. The Russell are big opium traders, and basically set up Skull and Bones at Yale University. Initial funding came in from the Rothschilds, and then some later funding came in from the Rockefeller Foundation, and the British Crown put money into this as well. So,
Eric, from the Frankfurt School, a lot of the members of the Frankfurt School in Germany that really came up with these concepts of social engineering and cultural debasement for the purposes of population control, they were relocated from Germany to the United States before World War II broke out. And it really seems like they were plugged straight into these most advanced projects, such as the Institutes of Advanced Study, the one at Princeton that was the first one. They did the Princeton Radio Project, but you also find that Albert Einstein was pulled in. And it basically emerged around World War II, a series of conferences called the Macy Conferences, which began in 1941 and ran through to 1960. The Josiah H. Macy Foundation that put the conferences on has been linked to the CIA. The idea that they came up with was that they would create their own personality called the democratic personality. And that would be a counter to the authoritarian personality, which had been developed from the Frankfurt School and had been employed by the Nazis. So the jackbooted Gestapo officer is our classic example of that. So the Crowleyan counterculture of the 60s was actually used to sell the personal computer. And basically computers were made by hippies and deadheads. And that culture was used for the marketing as well. Sun Microsystems, which was the Stanford University network, they developed this networking and workstation technology internally, and they spun it out to a separate company. And the CTO of Sun was a guy called Andreas Bechtolsheim. He was the first investor in Google, and Google was another example of this thing. They were students at Stanford. Stanford's spinning these things out. The military, the government's coming in to pay for it. We gave birth to the first $1 trillion startup, which is Fairchild Semiconductor. And they have traced more than 2,000 companies in Silicon Valley that can track their origin to this one company, Fairchild, including Burning Man. Intel spun out of Fairchild. I mean, the whole name of it, Intel inside. Oracle, the database company, they have 48.3% of the world's database market. It began as an internal CIA project. And Oracle was also the name of a popular counterculture magazine in San Francisco in the 60s. Interval Research, a think tank of Microsoft founder Paul Allen, came up with a lot of the early work that became Google, and it spun out of a not very well-known organization called the Highlands Group. Both Apple Mac and Microsoft Windows spun out of Xerox PARC. It's hard to find a very highly valuable Fortune 500 tech company that hasn't partnered with the NSA, that hasn't partnered with the government to share our data. They also created things called the digital being. And this was a very deliberate attempt to take what Timothy Leary et al. Had done with the human being and recreate that for the digital age. And so they had at least 16 of these digital beings, or they may even still be going today. And they brought together all countercultural figures such as Timothy Leary and John Perry Barlow, to be the ringleaders of this new world. So this group, they were there in the 60s making the human being. They're there in the 80s making the digital being. They're there in the 90s making Burning Man. It's not even that they work for Stanford or SRI. It's the same dudes.
So at the bottom right of this map, there's a yellow star, and that is Burning Man headquarters. They're at 660 Alabama Street. And then following that up in a straight line, you see the Long Now Foundation, which is at Fort Mason. That is where Stewart Brand bases his operations, I think, these days. And a lot of the old school super genius guys of Silicon Valley are kind of connected to that. Another organization that was also founded in San Francisco in 1986 was the Cacophony Society. And in the official history of Burning Man, they'll tell you the tale that the Cacophony Society was this freewheeling group of pranksters who sort of gave birth to Burning Man. And this is the very first flyer from the Cacophony Society promoting the first zone trip to the desert for Burning Man in 1990. And you see at the top of the flyer, under the word burning, is the symbol of the winged sun disk, which is a very common occult symbol, and we'll get onto that in a moment. I want to also point out a couple of things related to this promotion of Burning Man in 1990, where we start to add up a lot of the contradictions in the official stories of Burning Man. One of them is that it says the zone activities will include a group ritual requiring your participation to raise and immolate the Burning Man. So it's been called the Burning Man by 1990. But this is the first thing they list. We're going out here to do a group ritual. And the second aspect of that, it requires their participation. And when I first went to Burning Man in 1998, that was very much what it was about. No spectators. There are no spectators. Just by being there, you are a participant. Everyone is sort of required and expected to participate. And this shows that concept was there from the very, very beginning. They're going out to the desert to do a ritual. It's right there in black and white. And within the Burning Man community, a lot of is made of secrecy, of pledges, of non-disclosure agreements. Anyone who volunteers for the Burning Man organization is specifically forbidden to speak about Burning Man on social media. They have to actually sign a contract about it. And remember, you're talking about like maybe 10,000 people that are the volunteers for it, right? So these people are highly obsessed with secrecy.
And I've got the Burning Man ticket there. You voluntarily assume the risk of serious injury or death by attending. I mean, what a perfect disclaimer for the acid tests, right? It's like, if anything happens to you here, you've already opted in by purchasing the ticket, assuming the liability, and then making the pilgrimage and journey to get there in the first place. And the other thing is it sort of starts on St. Bartholomew's Day, which is interesting because that's another satanic holiday. There was an enormous massacre in France ordered by Catherine de Medici on St. Bartholomew's Day, and blood ran in the streets. There's a fair to basically held in honor of St. Bartholomew, the Bartholomew Fair, held in the city of London at the last week of August, the time of year of Burning Man, from 1133 until 1855. And in this fair, they featured musicians, acrobats, freaks, wild animals, puppets, and sideshows. It was suppressed in 1855 for encouraging debauchery and public disorder. They say it's not about money, but their annual budget is getting close to $40 million a year for an event that goes for a week. Yeah, it's getting pretty close now to $500 for a regular ticket. They have if you're rich, you could buy a more expensive ticket. And so there's a restriction on the number of regular tickets. Seems to be no restriction on the number of high-priced tickets. You've got very much the transhumanist agenda is being pushed culturally through Burning Man. This is the guest speakers they get in to talk about how we're all going to merge with the machines.
Here we have, look, this is looking at Burning Man from the air. And, the immediate thing that you notice is the whole thing takes place inside a Pentagon. I mean, could it be much more obvious than that? This is a picture of when the Burning Man burns. This is from 2014, and I believe the man that year was about 125 feet high. But what happens is the man's arms go up in this power pose. It's known as the Apophis pose. And then fireworks come out of it and it burns to the ground. So this is the climactic moment of the whole ceremony. And this pose, the Apophis pose, that comes from Crowley. So Crowley has a specific set of different poses and rituals that you can do. And we see a lot of this Freemasonic, Egyptian symbolism and mythology at Burning Man. There's a lot of pyramids. There's a lot of all-seeing eyes, sphinxes, Anubis. In the middle at the top is the stylized version of the Burning Man symbol. And the top right, you see the logo for the Council for Secular Humanism. Who knew there was even such a council? But secular humanism is very, very much aligned with what Burning Man is all about. This is basically the unreligion that Michael Aquino talked about and that H.G. Wells talked about the New World Order needing, that the religion of no religion, which is a religion for the secular. Looking at this winged sun disk symbol a little bit more, what do you know? It's the symbol of the Rosicrucian Order, the American Order of the Rosy Cross, which the guy behind the first Burning Man, Timothy O'Neill, is very much heavily involved in. So that may well explain why that symbol was on the first flyer going out to the Cacophony Society.
This guy, Brian Behlendorf, his Wikipedia page says he was the first chief technology guru of Burning Man, and he was going there from very early days. He's now the CTO of the World Economic Forum in Davos. So he basically went and set up Burning Man, and then he went and set up Davos, is how it seems to me. He's on the board of the EFF. He built Wired's Hot Wired website, which was one of the first places used to promote Burning Man on the internet. And he also created the SF Raves mailing list. And he's the primary developer of Apache. So that's a hell of a dude to come in as the first technology guru of Burning Man. You got the founder of Monster.com. He has a major sound camp there called Root Society. Bob Pittman, the founder of MTV and Clear Channel, which is now called iHeartRadio. Bruce DeCarl, that runs the Wayback Machine. He's a big Burning Man guy. Philip Rosedale, that created Linden Labs and Second Life. He got the inspiration to create that at Burning Man. And then Bob Wallace, who is employee number 9 at Microsoft. He's also a co-founder of Maps and was at the initial hacker conferences. We've also got Hollywood out there. Susan Sarandon did a whole thing for Timothy Leary, a big ritual recently. Jared Leto, he bought the facility at Lookout Mountain that Dave McGowan spoke about in his book. And Gilman Louie, who was the entrepreneur, founder of Spectrum Holobyte, he went on to be the founder of In-Q-Tel. And I think we mentioned him before in the last episode, David de Rothschild, a major Burning Man guy. Not the only Rothschild that goes to Burning Man. I know of perhaps 4. So this guy, John Law, he first goes to Burning Man in 1989, and he ends up becoming one of the first owners of it with Larry Harvey and with Michael. Then they have a bit of falling out after the Halco debacle where somebody got killed. And when he left, he said that he knows Larry, he's worked with him, and the man is evil. This guy, John Law, is a founder of the Cacophony Society as well, and he's a direct link between San Francisco's Cacophony Society and this earlier Suicide Club. And the Suicide Club, they were a secret society. They prepared to risk their lives, and they were doing things like infiltrating neo-Nazi groups and the Moonies cult. Jack Parsons, occultist and disciple of Aleister Crowley, he had his own little group, was called the Suicide Squad, also sometimes called the Suicide Club. The type of activities they're doing seem to be tied up with projects that, the director of Central Intelligence had been connected to as well. That's one hell of a coincidence.
Many of the Burning Man founders have a military intelligence background. The military does testing and prototyping at Burning Man. There are all these connections to the Presidio, to Bohemian Grove, Stanford Research Institute, the Pentagon, the Council on Foreign Relations, DARPA. There are all these notable military people that have been to Burning Man. Stewart Brand, Jim Channon, Wesley Clark, Supreme Commander of Allied Forces for Europe, for NATO. And he ran for president. Dennis Kucinich ran for president, goes to Burning Man, Council of Foreign Relations, Grover Norquist. This is a concentration of the man. So these are technologies that we know Silicon Valley has trialed and prototyped at Burning Man. I mean, Burning Man themselves have marine radar that they're using to spot fence jumpers. Google has the Keyhole satellite, became Google Earth. Then the Skybox, low orbit satellites, Google Maps, Google Street View, Google Doodle, all come from Burning Man. Flash mobs, which as used for the Arab Spring, Burning Man, virtual reality, Second Life. People tracking in Afghanistan by the Synergy Strike Force, Burning Man. Fire chat for the Hong Kong protests. Cell phone technology of open BTS that was provided at Burning Man. Self-driving cars have been tested out there. Some of the art cars are actually early prototypes of the self-driving car stuff. Live video streaming to the web, one of the earliest cases of that. Basically, when the launch of the Tesla Roadster was when Elon Musk took it to Burning Man, the first ever prototype. There's a broad spectrum of government agencies involved, and the recent position for the Bureau of Land Management to be head of Burning Man required a Q-level security clearance from the Department of Energy, which is equivalent to a military top secret. So I'm going to name some of these specific DARPA projects and IARPA projects. Project Transformation, which was run out of the Stewart Institute. Michael Aquino said that's where he got most of the thinking in mind warfare. And Project Mayhem 2012 in particular, which they say it is an active reality game. It's taken on a number of different forms in its life, and it's probably best known to people through the novel and then the movie Fight Club. And the guy, Chuck Palahniuk, the author of Fight Club, he said that this is modeled on the Cacophony Society. He was a member of the Cacophony Society. There's Project Mayhem 2012, and then there's Project Mayhem 2020. And the Project Mayhem people are quite open about saying that, yep, this is an occult thing, this is sorcery, this is a magical thing for mind control that we're doing. You've got the Changing Images of Man, of course, which was Stanford Research Institute and the Institute of Noetic Sciences, both organizations doing projects at Burning Man. Project Active Citizen, or DERIS. DERIS is the Domestic Emergency Response Information Service. It was tested at the Burning Man event in Nevada and then at Shadow Bowl. Part of this DERIS Active Citizen is the Community Intelligence Coordination Center, and it begins with data, all source reporting, information, what is happening, and knowledge is context. So basically, if you have any interaction at Burning Man with any of the radio, the first responders, anyone, it's going into this experimental data system that is looking for pattern information. We've also talked about Project Strong Angel, the Hexayurt that's very popular at Burning Man, came out of that Pentagon project. Project Responder is detailed in the notes to the slide. We also have the Synergy Strike Force. I've got their logo there. We've talked about them quite a bit. This is like an elite Pentagon DARPA research team where the entire team goes to Burning Man and then goes to Afghanistan and tries out this type of technology they've been developing in actual war zones. You've got the Marine Corps, the FBI, the DEA, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which is basically CIA inside the FBI. The Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Energy, the Department of Homeland Security. This is just ones we know are actively at Burning Man doing projects and operations. You start talking about something at Burning Man and it will manifest before you very rapidly. Now, I used to think that that was proof that magic is real, but now I wonder if it's not proof that, DARPA is listening to everything I say. And if I mention, a hot girl in a pink tutu, 2 minutes later, a hot girl in a pink tutu works past, maybe that isn't a coincidence. So in 2009 and 2010, they trialed these protests at UC Berkeley first, and then UC Santa Cruz and UC Davis. And ostensibly the protests were over tuition hikes. They occupied the square in the Berkeley University, took over University Square, and then later as an experiment, they took over the on-ramp to the freeway. And then it moved to Moldova. There was civil unrest. In Iran in 2009, 2010, a whole bunch of protests that they called a Facebook revolution. Tunisia, 2010, 2011, the start of the Arab Spring. This was called the WikiLeaks revolution. In Egypt, 2011, this was called the Twitter uprising and also a Facebook revolution. And then that led to, in 2011, Occupy Wall Street, where you basically have COINTELPRO, Chaos, and Phoenix projects all intersecting. In Spain, they had anti-austerity protests called the Indignados, and that triggered actually a rise to power of a new political group that is currently still the ruling powerful group
within Barcelona and Madrid. And then in Ukraine, 2013, 2014, we had we had a colour revolution, followed by an actual military coup and actual civil war. Then we have the Black Lives Matter starting in the US, 2013, with the Trayvon Martin case. In Hong Kong in 2014, they called it Umbrella Revolution. There are 200,000 people there using a peer-to-peer chat technology in their smartphones called Fire Chat, which had previously been prototyped and tested at Burning Man before being deployed for the Hong Kong protests. In 2008, Cass Hunsey starts talking about cognitive infiltration. Armies of trolls going out to these echo chambers of each little group in social media, pushing the narrative and fighting against anyone that's questioning the narrative. And so he came up with this as an idea, and this was signed off and implemented as a plan, right? This isn't just about spreading propaganda. They want to get inside your head, and they want to attack and alter the actual way you think. The way you take information in and think is of great interest to these government and military groups. 2012, we get the Smith Modernisation Act, which, I mean, basically threw the Smith Act out the window. And this is the legislation that made it completely legitimate for the White House, for the Pentagon, for the intelligence agencies to run psyops domestically against the American people. This is one of the most outrageous pieces of law ever. And since this, we've seen an absolute explosion in the number of false flags, synthetic terror events, hoaxes, So they're saying that you can take the stuff you develop for the enemy, and now that can be used on the American population. And it's going to be used through press, publications, radio, motion pictures, the internet, and other information media, including social media, and through information centers, instructors, and other direct or indirect means of communication. So, the Tides, Gates, Ford, Soros foundations, this Occupy movement, this protest movement, it wouldn't exist without these billionaires to finance it. That's the weapon. That's the egregore. That's the flash bomb. That's your Antifa. And, I'll point out that this actually comes directly from Kurt Lewin of the Frankfurt School and then the Tavistock Institute, this idea of the collective power of leaderless groups. There's a Tavistock plan. This is a rite of passage for Silicon Valley, just like the rites of Ulysses. You have to go on this pilgrimage, and then you're one of us, and then, you're in the secret club. And that's how LSD has been sold, really, from the beginning. For this point, you really need to understand weird scenes inside the canyon. If you haven't studied Dave McGowan's work, you might think me saying that, 30-odd people involved with Burning Man's founding coming from military backgrounds is irrelevant. But when you read McGowan's work, you realize that, wait a minute, just about this entire counterculture of the 60s came from people connected to this group that all emerged in one place at one time, found each other, and all went and made albums, often with the same musicians playing the music on the albums who weren't the actual son of military people, rock stars that were made out to be. I think we can understand how MK Ultra didn't stop. The acid tests, they're still going at Burning Man. And all of the different elements that are in these acid tests are kind of elements for brainwashing, So this is mass observation. What do these people do? That's what an acid test is. What do they do if we give them LSD? But it's also weaponized anthropology. How do we make them suggestible? How do we get them thinking the way we want? Get inside their head, rearrange their head, and then have their thoughts pointed in a much more controllable direction. I hope that, people can wake up, because this isn't just about Burning Man. Burning Man itself, it's almost past its use-by date. The sooner we can identify it and wake up to it, the sooner we can get past it.